Hello, everybody. Thank you guys for having us here, and what a big turnout to hear about what we do. Keep this right. Okay, I'm holding it. Yeah, so my name's Alika. Like I was introduced, executive director, co-founder. We also have here today, other than Blake, is Danny DiMartini, who's our head science director, and Kapono Kaluiokalani, our other co-founder. So yeah, we all came over. We came over from Oʻahu. We're Oʻahu-based 501c3. We do most of our work on West Oʻahu, but now we're kind of all around the island. We're just 4 years old. We're a pretty new nonprofit, and all we do is coral restoration. So we'll talk more about that. So who we are, kind of just started talking about that. So we kind of started, I was in commercial fishing for 15 years, and we just kind of, initially Kapono and I just kind of had the conversations about our impact is just always taking. And we just thought, how can we turn the infrastructure that we already had, multiple boats, tons of scuba tanks, our own compressor, and a knowledge of our home reefs really well, and actually do something positive other than just take. So that's kind of how we got started. And then we put out an ad in Craigslist saying fishermen seeking scientists. And Danny DiMartini, a professor at BYU, answered that, in addition to 20 other really weird people. But he was the least weird of them all, so it just worked out perfect. And we've been fishing together, surfing together, and just hanging out and planting coral just for 4 years. So yeah, it progressed really quick. Okay, so again, I kind of alluded to we're fishermen. So initially we started with we want more fish, right? Either we really suck as fishermen and we're not good at catching them. Maybe there's not as many. Maybe it's a combination of the two. But if we make more habitat, we can make more fish. So, and that's kind of was our end goal initially, at least my thinking. But as many of you guys know, there's a lot of other economic, like value to reefs, ecological services that they provide, medicine compounds. But the big one I want to highlight here, other than fish, is the coastal protection. So you can see these two graphs, Oʻahu and Maui. This is a study done in 2019 by USGS. Just like where Oʻahu and Maui are in terms of like the economic valuation of our coastal communities, and it's huge. The map on the left kind of shows an inundation zone if you were to lose the coral reefs of what would be flooded in these kind of 100-year storms. So can send you guys the link of that study. It's actually a really good one and has really in-depth stuff for Hawaii's coastlines. So anyway, this is just more why coral reefs are important. And just a really quick background, we work primarily with 5 species. So the 5 most common species in Hawaii are these. Parietes lobata is by far the most prevalent out there. Parietes compressa would be the second, and then kind of depends where you go, the species composition with Monturpa capitata, Passalopera meandrina, and grandis. But these are the 5 that we are permitted from the state to work with on our current permit. And these are kind of the 5 that we've been focusing on the last 4 years that we've been around. Okay, and here's what we've done on Oʻahu, kind of to date, is 1,300 scuba dives, which is 680 hours underwater, and then these outplants, which we'll talk in more detail in a bit, 2,700 outplants. And they're kind of 2 different categories, which again, we'll get into detail in a bit, is our large rescued colonies and coral fragments. So different ways we apply that. The other thing we do is our program in mapping and monitoring. So we create high resolution photo mosaics. So right now, yeah, we've done about 2.5 football fields worth. And I think we have more than that. Just processing them takes forever. So we're working on that. But we have a lot of sites photo mosaicked already. And then education and outreach, you can see here. So the 2,500 number is kind of in person. So again, we'll talk about that more, about how we do community, bring community into the events that we have and have them really be a part of the restoration of their reefs. And we try to keep that in mind all the time, right? The communities we go to, these are not our reefs. Dare I say, did anyone here work for the state? They're not the state's reefs, right? They're the people's reefs, all of the people. So we try to keep that in mind, and all of us work together to protect it for the people of Hawaii, right? So yeah, we definitely try to get people involved. And what we've been seeing on Oʻahu, you can see here is a map of the different communities that we do work in and different partnerships, federal, state agencies, resorts at Ko'olinas. really gives us a lot of support. And then again, the community organizations. And what we started to see, not only ecologically, the differences and similarities from one coast to another, but is also within the communities and what they're asking for, what they prioritize. And that's kind of how we came up with this CBCRA, community-based coral restoration kind of idea. And basically we ripped it off, a really good program, CBFSA, the subsistence fishery areas. We think it's a good way to have co-management with the government and communities. And this is kind of in that same spirit. So yeah, what we see is that, like, if you guys are familiar with Oʻahu, East Oʻahu and West Oʻahu, demographics are very different, economically, socially, culturally, in every way, just about. But we see these things kind of that, again, are in common, and that's where we kind of started developing like this three-phase approach that's flexible, but kind of meets a lot of what we're hearing from community members all over, and not just Oʻahu, why we're here on Maui, Kauai, Hawaii Island. Kind of everybody's really interested right now in this new, it's not new, I mean, Maui Ocean Center have been doing it for a long time, but relatively new in the ocean is this coral restoration really blowing up. So the three-phase kind of process that we're going to talk about is, it's not intended to solve all the problems right off the bat. They're small, low-risk, pilot-scale outplantings to inform if scalable restoration is called for in the future. Because a lot of projects are already underway, and a lot of communities are asking for things. Or they might even inform of what not to do and where not to do this, which is just as important. So yeah, don't expect, we always tell everybody, while we did have a slipper lobster move into one of our structures the next day, that's not common. You can't just plant coral and expect all the lobster to come back. Don't expect the school of ahi or ulua to show up. Pilot scale, and we'll keep going about why. Okay, so our approach and how we pick partnerships. So we're partnered here with MNMRC, so thank you guys for hosting us. And we got to do some dives and talk about their work on land and in the ocean and our work. So just the partnership happened pretty organically. And how we pick partners around Oʻahu and now around other parts of the state is basically people that are already doing good terrestrial work. So this is kind of our second disclaimer, is that we recognize that we could plant coral all day long and fix things all day long, spend millions of dollars doing it. It is an expensive work. But without the land-based work happening, in parallel, it's completely useless. So we recognize that, and again, that's a part of setting expectations for some communities, right? It's like if they have a degraded coral reef, sometimes they're not savable yet, but that's why we really rely on our partnerships with people that are taking on that Kuleana to, fix their watershed and restore their, their place. So that's been our strategy. Not very scientific, but it's just local style, and it's been working really well for us because we just meet great people. Picking partners based on values has been a kind of our secret to success. Okay, so phase one. Sorry, trying to stay on time. Okay, so phase one, we kind of talked about this three-phase approach, right? So phase one, nothing is happening. We're in phase one right now for Maui specifically with our partnership with MNMRC. So they reached out to us, and we met through multiple different ways, and people, Hawaii, everyone know everybody. But we just started talking about the work that we do and how does it complement what they do. So that's kind of the start, right? And once we see our values are aligned, great, let's talk story. But what we're seeing is these 4 foundational goals you'll see here are the most common that are brought up by every community group that we talk to or stakeholder, including resorts, tourism industry, infrastructure. They're all asking about these 4 things. And the state and federal agencies in Hawaii have adopted 3 of these 4, and we kind of added this last one. So they're ecological resilience. The state and federal agencies adopted specifically thermal resilience, so high temperature resilience corals. And we're also looking at not just temperature, but sediment, which you all in Maui know a lot about. Sediment resilient corals, right? And just general human tomfoolery resistance, right? Just generally what is more resilient to us, to humans. So the other one is fish habitat. We talked about, we're fishermen. This has been, close to my heart. Probably the most popular one that we get from communities is how do we get, more fish? How do we bring back fish? Coastal protection is kind of the new-ish one, but the biggest on the horizon, is how do we build coral reefs to protect our coastal infrastructure. And the last one we added, so those three were all the state priorities. We added this last one in emergency repair, which is another reason why we started this work. On West Oʻahu, we were seeing reefs get damaged and nothing was really happening, but when they happen in other parts, it was an urgent matter, usually around the Waikiki town area. But it's just also because of resources, right? But we just saw the need, like when things break, let's fix it. And again, Maui, you guys have a lot of experience in that as well. So basically, do we have community support to continue? If yes, then we would kind of go on to our next step, which we did. So we got in the water with MNMRC's dive team, some of our dive team, and we got to scout some sites, which I'm going to go over right now. And we kind of rely, on local knowledge. Again, we're from Oʻahu. Yeah, we dive here a little bit, but we don't know the reefs like plenty of you guys know. So we really rely on the local knowledge about pointing out. So we talk about site selection, right? So what are we looking for? Hard substrate, like not too much sedimentation, relatively healthy reefs, that they can sustain, living coral there. So a lot of different things that go into it that if you guys have more questions, we can talk about later. A lot of this stuff there's a lot to it, so I'm going to go over stuff kind of quick. So the first site that we looked at here on South Maui, this is Maluaka. And this is the photo mosaic. It's not as nice in this kind of format, but you can zoom in like on our computers or if we send you the file. And you get really high resolution up to, I don't know what, a centimeter of the coral, or even more than that. So this site right here is about the size of a basketball court. And basically what this graph is just saying is that lobata, like we mentioned earlier, is by far the most prevalent here, and then compressa being the second. And what this is starting to inform is, one, the state permitting agencies. If we say we want a permit to work here, okay, what does it look like? What are you guys asking for? So this really helps that. But then as we start to think about how do we restore a reef, what does it look like, right? Some people want to write their name, write a logo. We're not into that. We just want to basically use nature as our architect and copy it. So that's what we use the monitoring for. And this is what it looks like for those of you that haven't got to dive here, Maluaka. So we dove 3 months ago-ish, maybe a little longer. Yeah, so this is it. Kind of we're talking about some bare substrate, but hard substrate so that we can actually fix things to the floor. So this was a pretty suitable site for restoration. And here's that orthomosaic on the left, which is a two-dimensional flat piece. And then the three-dimensional one, again, it's kind of cool. You can kind of swim. Is it working up here? Yep. Swim through it, but if you have it on your own computer, you can really, like if you want to see one coral head, you can swim, dive into it, spin around, check out a coral head. So it's a really cool tool. And it really lets us know that if we do end up doing coral restoration here, it's giving, hopefully, the communities, the state agencies, and everybody a peace of mind that we knew what it looked like, and we can see if our interventions are improving the area or doing harm. But this is just a part of what we're doing, and it's a really useful tool for outreach as well to kids and politicians and anybody, really. Okay, so second site, Oneuli. So this was another pretty suitable site. You can see a lot of compressa here. Yeah, a lot of lobata. Hard substrate like we talked about. And same thing, orthomosaic on the left, about the size of a basketball court, and then the 3D one on the right. So, and then we also have up here the maps. I'm gonna lift them up a little bit. So if you guys want to check it out, we're leaving these here with MNMRC. So these have been really useful. Like we brought them to some of our community events in West Oʻahu, and we like draw out with dry erase pens with the communities. Like this is what we are thinking on how we would rebuild your reef, right? Like, and then what do you guys think? And we kind of do it together, right? It's a collaborative approach. So, but again, it's kind of neat that this is timestamped for 3 months ago. If you do it after restoration, or even if you didn't do restoration, but you kept doing them in regular intervals, you get these really high resolution maps that are really cool to see what's happening on your reef. And like the flying fish guys did, right? That was a huge area. So really impressive work that this kind of complements. This is a little more detailed, but obviously the area they're catching is like, they caught like the whole West Maui, which is pretty amazing. We can't afford that. We take these with GoPros. So again, our approach is how do we make this scalable for community members? So 2 or 3 GoPros and you can collect these maps, right? So we want to, everything we do, we're trying to keep that in mind, is how do we make this available to as many people as possible. Okay, I'm almost done with this phase 1. How am I doing on time? Time, man. Oh, okay, I'm over. Okay, we talked about a lot of this stuff, restoration plan, sharing with you all. So we've been doing this for the last few months with MNMRC leading the way. This is, your guys' backyard. You guys know who the people are. We've been meeting with people on Maui just to make sure people understand what we're trying to do and why. And really, again, it's your guys' reef. So we just want to make sure we share it and everything is cool to proceed to the next step. We can do outreach events, which we can talk about more later. We do that. This picture here is one that we did in Poka'i Bay, West Oʻahu. And assuming we have community approval going forward, then we go into permitting, which I could give a whole nother 2-hour-long talk on, but we'll skip that. There's a lot to it. Okay, I think we're going to do a little different just to break it up a little because it's a lot with phase 2 and 3. Phase 2 is long. So if you guys have any questions now, I think actually we could take like 1 or 2 just to take like a short pause before we go on to phase 2.
Mahalo. So the areas that were chosen here on Maui to start with are Malawaka and Oneuli down McKenna side, yeah? And the idea was that the reefs there have suffered and they'd be likely candidates to grow more coral?
Yeah, they suffered a little bit. They're actually pretty healthy. So a little bit of degradation, but not enough that we would say that it's not worth trying to fix. But mostly, I mean, sediment is king here. It's mostly because sediment is not impacting that site nearly as much as some of the other sites, which we will show at least one of the other sites that we looked at that was just not quite there, even though we have strong community support to like kind of move up there. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, maybe one more and then we'll move on.
Hi, thank you. I just had a question about maintaining what the work accomplished. Do you have an access to the maintenance or the repair? You constructed an emergency repair specificity, and I'm just curious, like, what does that look like once it's established? Who takes care of it? I know that you mentioned that these are for public use, and is there an agency or any type of organization beyond a nonprofit that helps take the maintenance and the cyclic things into consideration?
You mean maintenance of the reef itself?
Yes, to make sure that when things are needing repair, that it's been documented. It has, if there's commercial activity that continues to damage a reef or anything like that, has that been tracked? Thank you.
Okay, there's no real organization. I mean, the state that's their legal responsibility, right? And we're kind of asking for some of that Kuleana from them to do the work. We would, I don't know if this is a Jill question, but we would kind of rely on our local partners if they want to build. So that's kind of the idea of where we're headed. Sorry, a lot of feedback on this speaker. Where we're headed is to build capacity within the different communities around the state, is that you would be building the workforce, which we have more about that. Yeah, we're building a workforce that will create jobs to take care of it. So yeah, phase 3 will have a lot of that. Yeah. Okay, and yeah, we'll move on. We're gonna have plenty of time for questions at the end. So we'll go on to phase 2 now.
All right, so a whole lot of new information. Thanks for bearing with us, but now we'll get into more of the specifics of the actual coral work side of things. As you guys can see, there's quite a bit of work and preparation that goes into restoration before a single coral is planted, but once that's all been accounted for, we can move on to the next phase. And for those of you that may not be as familiar, we're using corals of opportunity for all of our restoration interventions, which are corals that have become dislodged from the reef substrate and have a relatively low chance of survival. So when these corals break as a result of things like wave energy, anchor damage. They usually don't stand a very good chance of survival. More often than not, they end up tumbling down the reef substrate, end up slowly become burying in the sand. And by intervening and rescuing these corals, we can give them a second chance and save decades of coral growth. So step one in this process is pretty straightforward, the collection of the corals of opportunity. So we go to a defined area with our dive teams and start to survey the area and collect the corals in what we refer to as a centralized cache site, which is essentially a stable area where we can house the corals for short-term storage until we compile enough for us to come back and plant them all. Usually this is relatively brief, approximately a week or so. And when we're out there collecting our corals, we aren't necessarily taking every single colony. We do have specific criteria and things we're looking for, which you can see on our health scale here. So ideally, we're targeting corals that are what we classify as a 4 or a 5. Corals that have broken off relatively recently and have a pretty small amount of tissue mortality. So ideally, at least 75% of the coral colony is still alive, and there's less than 25% tissue mortality. And this is really important for some of our more sensitive species that we work with. Each different coral species is different, so that's taken into account as well. And then in terms of sizes, ideally we're working with things that are closer to 20 to 30 centimeters, although based on our permit, and Alika's got a demonstration for the ballpark, what we're looking at. And then we're permitted to work up to 60 centimeters. So with Hawaii's slow growth rates, these are representing potentially 10 to 20 years of coral growth per colony. In terms of moving these corals around, we're permitted to move these corals a maximum of 2 kilometers. However, with most of our restoration activities, we've seen that there are more than enough corals of opportunity just in the vicinity that we can reach on diver range. However, every area is different, so the option is there if we need it. And if we do have to transport these corals further than diver teams would allow, our boats are set up with specialized infrastructure to minimize stress for the corals at every stage of the process. And the idea with these relatively small collection distances is that it minimizes the potential for aquatic invasive species introduction, disease, and helps to maintain similar genetics to what's already present in there. And then getting a little bit more in depth with our different restoration intervention options once we have our corals of opportunity. Everything in this toolkit is designed to be adaptable and flexible to meet the specific needs of the community and the areas in which we're working. So these first 3 on the right-hand side are different variations of microfragmentation. So when we have our corals of opportunity that break off the reef, again, something like wave energy, maybe it's anchor damage, we can collect those corals of opportunity, and usually we like to do public outreach events to actually get the community hands-on and actually fragmenting the corals. So it might seem kind of counterintuitive if you're trying to grow coral, why are you cutting them apart? But it actually does help to accelerate their growth rates. So we can frag these corals into smaller pieces, roughly 2 to 3 centimeters in size, and then attach them to something like our pyramid module, which Alika has over here.
Okay, I got the mic. We never did this before, so if I messed it up, bear with me. But just to demonstrate, because there's a lot here in these slides. So just to demonstrate real quick, and we do this at some of our events, just to kind of, show the basics. So I'm a big wave, I'm an anchor, whatever. People stepping on the coral, all this stuff, right? This is the reef. And corals getting knocked off, so corals of opportunity, we find it. So right now we're talking about microfragmentation. Pretty straightforward. We grab a coral of opportunity off the ground or in a place that it has a high likelihood of mortality, and then we bring it up to our community event, and then they help us fragment it. So we make these pyramid structures. We call everything a module. That's basically artificial. And we cut the coral, like Blake talked about, into these so these sponges are about 3 centimeters. And then basically the microfragmentation process is we cut it with a saw, and you just put them on here, and that's it.
And because we're using genetically identical corals, using 1 colony per module, as the corals start to grow, they're going to fuse together, recognizing each other, and they form 1 colony in a fraction of the time it would take them to otherwise grow.
Can't even tell now, right? It looks just like the coral.
And then in a very similar process with a slight variation, we can also take these corals of opportunity and fragment them, attach them to plugs, and store them for short periods of time, roughly 2 to 3 months at maximum, to something like our nursery racks over here, to give them time to start to encrust and grow and stabilize before they're outplanted onto something larger. And these are relatively low-tech, low risk to the surrounding reef as well. And pretty straightforward, but gets the job done.
Yeah, so PVC frame, pretty straightforward. Buy this at Home Depot for about $12.99. And we use stainless steel 316 anchors that'll be inserted into the floor. They're screwed in. The reason for that is just to pin this down without having to make a big structure, because big structures are very expensive. They take a lot of permitting to get in the water. This thing, when we're done, we remove these screws. You'll never know it was there. And if it were to come loose, this is probably going to do less damage than a regular coral head that was loose would do, right? This thing's super light. But super easy. We work in West Oahu primarily. It's not unusual for 20 to 30-foot swells to run through some of our sites. Granted, we're working deeper. And I think in Maui, we're proposing about 30 feet is the sites that we have. We work anywhere between 30 and 60 feet in West Oahu. But again, these have been pretty robust. It's little cheap PVC things. Same thing, grab the COO, pick it up, last one. And then we'll fragment them. Instead of putting them onto the module, how we just did with the micro-fragmenting, we just put them on these little plugs, little aragonite plugs. We glue it, and then we put them on here just to hang out until they start to grow over their plug, and then they're ready to put out on the reef with several methods.
And then very similar to our cement pyramid modules, we also have another variation, which we refer to as our fish habitat module. And once these fragments have time to grow a little bit and stabilize, we would then transfer them onto another module, which serves as a foundation for the corals to grow over. And in the meantime, it provides habitat for small fish and other marine life. And same idea here, the genetically identical coral starts to grow over and fuse together, forming a colony, and doesn't appear artificial once everything has started to grow in.
And this is the one I was telling you, we had the slipper lobster move in like the next day. I was very proud. But that's not going to happen every time, but I always like to brag about that.
And then with these fragments, there are some other applications we can consider if needed. One that might be useful here is the potential for testing these corals of opportunity for thermal resilience. So that's relatively straightforward. We take a biopsy of the coral colony, attach it to a fragment plug, and send it to an ex situ facility like the Maui Ocean Center Marine Institute or the HIMB Coral Resilience Lab to determine which corals are genetically resilient genotypes, which is going to be useful for combating coral bleaching in the future. And then we also have the potential to directly outplant these fragments to the seafloor onto something like a dead coral colony where the live tissue has died off but the structure remains intact, something that's referred to as reskinning. So essentially only the outer living layer of the coral is the living part. So if that's died off but the structure is still intact, something again like a bleaching event, this is another intervention we can consider.
So the reskinning is a really good tool for if you have a degraded reef that you had stopped whatever the stress was, but you, again, like Blake said, maybe this is a 100-year-old colony that died, but you still have this structure, right? And without living tissue on it, it's not going to grow. It's going to start to degrade, right? So reskinning is like Blake described, is you just get these same plugs and knock off this bottom part right here, and then you can just glue them all over. And then it's basically kind of just the same structure, the same three-dimensional structure, habitat, but now you're just putting a new genotype on it. So kind of a cool thing that's been working a lot in parts of Florida, Great Barrier Reef, all over, that hasn't been really tried here yet, that we think has a lot of promise.
And while we do have experience in all these different intervention options, and they're especially useful for public engagement, like I mentioned, the land-based fragmentation events that actually get people hands-on and working with the coral under supervision, but what we believe has the most potential for scalability and restoration impact is the direct transplant of the large rescued coral colonies. So here in Hawaii, we do have a lot of different challenges. The slow growth rates averaging on roughly 2 centimeters per year, and the wave energy is certainly challenging with the big swells. But to give you an idea for what this process looks like, if you do have a large coral colony that becomes detached, something that represents 20 to 30 potentially years of coral growth, more often than not, it ends up tumbling down the reef slope out of ideal conditions. But as you can see in the middle frame, the coral is still alive. It still is contributing to the ecosystem. We've got lots of fish living around it. And usually the corals can persist in this condition for a period of time until something like the next big swell comes through, the coral becomes overturned, and we end up with something on the far right-hand side here. It starts to break down, becoming sand and rubble. So by intervening and saving these coral colonies that represent decades of growth, we can keep them around, give them a second chance, and maintain all the benefits they offer to our communities above and below. So to give you guys an idea for what a typical restoration site might look like and some of these tools in practice, here's an example of one of the sites you guys saw earlier with the type of work that we are proposing. So again, the large rescue coral colonies give you the biggest return on ecological services considering the size and what they offer to the surrounding reef. And we would also propose putting up to 12 of these modules more as a starting point to see what is and is not possible so they can be scaled up and available for if the community deems it necessary in the future. And a typical restoration area, the intervention area comprises 2,000 square feet, although we do monitor the surrounding 4,000 square feet, which is roughly the size of a basketball court. And when we're planning these restoration areas, we really want to try our best to match the surrounding profile of the already existing reef. We don't want to do anything novel, and we really want to try to accelerate naturally occurring processes as much as possible. So we aren't planting corals that weren't historically there, and ideally the goal is that if you swam over the restoration site, you would never know that we were there. In terms of outplanting these coral colonies, we have a variety of different specialized tools and environmentally safe adhesives that we use for different applications. For something like our modules, we use a specialized mixture of cement that our science team has developed that has anti-pluming agents and viscosity modifying additives that allow the cement to stay together without pluming and affecting the surrounding reef. And we also use other adhesives like epoxy to secure the pin into the base of our coral colonies. A hole is drilled, and then we use a specialized super glue called Loctite 4090 to secure it in place. Again, a little bit more technical, but if anyone has questions about this, more than happy to answer questions at the end. And that brings us to phase 3. Which is the long-term monitoring in community. But before we jump into that, does anyone have maybe 1 or 2 questions specifically about the coral work? Yeah.
I was just wondering, I applaud what you're doing to restore the reef, but I was wondering if there's a prevention for the reef becoming this way that we could make more known and start to do, instead of just seeing what we can do to repair it, prevent it.
Absolutely. Coral restoration is costly. A lot of effort goes into it. So we completely agree that whenever possible, we should try our best to be preventative and prevent the damage from ever occurring in the first place. Our partners here on Maui, MNMRC, is really good about monitoring specific areas to ideally identify those areas and potential interventions that can prevent corals from being damaged in the first place. And that's something where our monitoring tools like the photomosaics are really useful. If you have continued monitoring in specific areas, tourism activity, for example, if you're consistently seeing coral damage happening, it's really nice to be able to point to specific, timestamps when things happen to be able to hold people accountable and prevent it from happening in the first place. We do as much outreach as we can to engage people and make that information available, but it does look different place to place.
Yeah, and I'll say, again, I think back to how we pick our partnerships. Our organization is dedicated strictly to this, and we partner with and recognize the need for, Mauka interventions to prevent damage from happening. So, yeah. Sorry, we'll hang out on that side the next round.
Hi, you mentioned about your tools that you're preferring to use. I didn't hear any mention about indigenous tools or how to restore that way. So to put epoxy and other alien forms to put the corals together is, to me, an invasive process. Have you heard of kumulipo?
Absolutely, yeah.
So as an indigenous person, I come from Kumulipo, and being that you're MNMRC and your organization starts with Kuleana, you didn't address the lineal descendants of that area and to recognize them before you start this presentation. That's part of your Kuleana to do. So I wanted to address that the methodology that you're using is unfamiliar to me as a lineal descendant, as an SME of Honuaula, Maluaka to be in particular. And there's 2 other people in this room who knows what I'm talking about. And I think that's why we're here, because I'm very concerned of these methods that you're proposing and not doing community outreach to lineal descendants, because that's my bread and butter. And I know every reef in that area, and so do my cousins. And so I'd like to hear more about your community outreach and the long-term monitoring and management system that you have in place.
Yeah, lot of things. So as far as the materials, yeah, you're right. They are new materials that aren't traditionally used, and we've tried some. Like we've tried new fibers, for example, to hold it down, but it just doesn't hold up. It didn't work. We tried a couple other different type of like wax, beeswax, and more like organic stuff, but none of them work for us. As far as the lineal descendant part, I think this is a part of it that we haven't gotten permits. We haven't even requested permits yet for this project, because that's kind of what we're doing now, is talking story with people and hearing out if there are concerns. So I think if there are, and that's again why we're here, is to hear them out and see if it's even wise to go forward, because we're not committed to this work no matter what, right? I mean, I think if people were really against it, that we would not proceed. So this is a part of that community engagement, and if you want to be a part of informing us, or you can direct us to other people, then that's kind of what we're doing today. And we've been kind of doing slowly, is just reaching out to as many people as we can, let them know what we're doing.
How's it? I'm Kapono. So before we even move forward, I would like to recognize us. I'm sorry, I didn't look to see who made that. NT, my name is Kapono Kaluhi Kalani. I'm from Laie. And I just want to give you the opportunity now. Please come and recognize the lineal descendants of your family, the people who we're going to do this work for. And if you could please come. Okay, but so moving forward, we just did not want. Okay. Okay. Thank you. We didn't mean any disrespect not to recognize you before. Okay, thank you.
All right, so that brings us to phase 3, which is the long-term monitoring and community. So obviously, with our restoration areas, being able to monitor them closely and detect any changes as well as evaluate success is really important to us. So we do this in various ways. Essentially, the photomosaics can be used as a modern-day, application of kilo practices, being able to pay attention to these changes that are occurring over time and make decisions accordingly. So before any restoration is conducted, we do a baseline photomosaic as a timestamp to document what is the condition of the current reef without any interventions before any work has been conducted. We also collect a photomosaic right after the corals have been planted, again, to establish a baseline before anything else happens in the area. We also monitor them at minimum at 6 months later, as well as annually, and then from every year there onward. Although we are obviously aware that if there are critical events, things like coral bleaching, damage incidences, or potential developments, that these mosaics could be collected as well. And they are relatively simple, but are a really powerful tool, allowing you to look at things like coral growth and survival, benthic invertebrate abundance, condition of the natural surrounding area, invasive species presence, and larval recruitment over time. And with that being said, I'll pass it back to Alika, who's going to go more in depth with the community management plans.
Okay. So phase 3, so this is assuming, restoration is done, or it's not, even just monitoring. So just collecting photomosaics is partnerships that we have where all we're doing is taking pictures, no coral intervention. That by itself is valuable. So we kind of asked the question, because we, had similar issues in West Oʻahu, and many communities did, kind of for the last question we had, right, is people coming in with these research projects specifically, and they're not exactly consulting the community, they're just telling them what they're gonna do and having an event to let them know that. And we've seen that in our own communities. But the question that, I always ask, like the research world, is how does your data support the community, right? Like what is the purpose of it? And if it doesn't really contribute to management plans that the communities have or they wanna develop, in their area, then I see what's useful for publishing papers and other research, but for us, that's not what we're focused on. So that's our first question is, what does the communities want to see, and how do they want to, how are they creating management plans? And we don't feel it's our kuleana to tell anybody, because again, we don't like when people come to our island or our beach and tell us what to do. So a lot of it is just a relationship of talking about what are the goals, right? And then what's the level of involvement? Again, with MNMRC, they're taking on a very active role with the monitoring portion and even the restoration portion, where they're going to be coming to Oʻahu, I believe in January or February, just to be diving and training with us, where we go over these methods and just, to make sure that we all know what we're doing together. But that's kind of a part of that building capacity, is how do we get more people to be in the workforce, taking care of their reefs or their backyards. So the idea is, again, that we are coming in to assist if communities want it with whatever priorities that they have. And kind of one of the best ways that we did, and something I'm the most proud of what we've done on Oʻahu, is we had started this COAST program that's funded by NOAA, federal government, and in a partnership with the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement. And it's kind of framed as a workforce development program that we recognize restoration is growing in a lot of communities and a lot of sectors around Hawaii and the world. So how do we, knowing that local people have incredibly strong water skills, water knowledge, what's happening on the reef, and how do we tap into that where maybe traditional pathways to academia were inaccessible for some of these community members. So that's kind of how we focus it. We did a West Oʻahu specific focused. So it was an underserved community grant is how they defined it. And yeah, we did 8 people, and we got all these certifications. So basically, to become a professional scuba diver, you need these skills, and there's more. I mean, there's a lot to it for, I know a lot of divers in here. And then just learning the basics of monitoring and coral restoration. And the other thing that we saw, that we got advice from, CNHA, was to provide paid stipends, because a lot of people have a hard time taking time away from their job to go, like sometimes scuba diving is a privilege, right? And not everybody has that they can just go, one, pay for these certifications and their time. So we provided paid stipends throughout the summer to make sure that if we are removing people from their job to get this, these certifications and experience, that at least they're being compensated for it. So we have 3 years of funding for that, and it's been really successful for maintaining people in the communities. And so we keep talking about scalable restoration, right? What is scalable restoration? It could be as big or small as any community would want, right? Or not. But these projects are happening. I mean, the first one that we talk about is like if land-based pollution and sources of damage are mitigated through many partnership, like many land-based partnerships that are underway on all islands. The restoration of fresh water is a huge thing that is the most common coming up with everybody. But once those things happen and the reefs start to get a little break from our local impacts like stressors, then we can potentially fix it. So that's one, is kind of like that fixing. The other one is we talked about the emergency response capacity. So we just had, this one is from Honolulu, where this ship ran aground. So we did a photo mosaic here. You can see the scars. But lucky you guys have Maui Ocean Center. We have a few entities that can do this on Oahu, but it's a tough process with permitting and like logistics. So how do we build capacity for scalable emergency restoration, for boat strikes, anchor damage? We had huge ones in Honolulu. We have an airplane that just got pulled out, if you guys saw that, in Kaneohe Marine Corps Base, Hawaii. Who's going to fix that? We volunteered, but again, there's a lot more to it than we thought as far as the powers that be making those decisions. But over time, as we build this team with multiple people from all around the state, we can do this in-house. And that's the case that we're trying to make to state and federal agencies. So emergency, artificial reefs is a big conversation, right? Especially for a lot of the fishing community. So we have a bunch. So there's one in South Maui. There's 3, I believe, on Oahu that are in diveable depths. But this project on this top right here, Reef Frame, is a $9 million project that's already underway in Waikiki. So big project. I think it's the size of like a football field or something like that, where they're dropping these big blocks and they want to put coral on and just make all this live reef. That's kind of our thing, right? Is like to start really small with a very low risk, low impact thing to start to know before we go too big. And hopefully, we don't make any big mistakes. But that's why starting small, pilot scale with our CBCRAs is kind of how we think we'll build scale over time. And then the other really big one that's happening already is this Reef Fence project. If you guys haven't heard of it, I encourage you to look it up, YouTube it, or we can send you a link. This is paid for by the Department of Defense, and it's a partnership with the University of Hawaii, where they're building coral reefs to protect coastal infrastructure, specifically military bases. We're interested in it because of its civilian application, right? How do we protect our communities and our coastal, our houses, our businesses, our cultural sites, our power plants, like all these different things that are at risk. So this is happening. And what we want to do is, again, as we start to spread this work, it's happening in so many different areas, is to put it in the community's hands to make the decision as I really want this or I really don't want this, which is just as important. So scalable restoration is already happening, and Hawaii we're catching up to the rest of the world. Okay, so our goals here on what we're trying to achieve. So I talked about earlier, we have partners on kind of every island at this point, ish. We're still kind of dialing it in and still in that same phase that we're in now, is talking story and listening to concerns and shall we proceed or pump the brakes and not. But a lot of support for coral restoration around the state. So a lot of communities are asking for it. And our goal over the next 5 years is to have 15 community partners and maybe 2 sites per moku, or depending on how we spread it. But we just want a representative select sites across the archipelago that will inform, again, these are small pilot scale sites, but they'll inform a lot of what each other are doing, right? And this we saw through the organization KUA, really good, where they started a limu hui, right? So they have limu practitioners from all over the state that talk to each other and they meet. So we've been talking to them. It's like, hey, does it make sense to have a coral hui or koa hui, right? They do the same thing with fish ponds, a loko ia hui. And so we're kind of thinking along the same lines, is how do we build this capacity in multiple communities, and we share this information as we go on. And I think that is it. Mahalo.
Okay, thank you, Alika and Blake. So it's about 6:30, and we can leave about 10 or so minutes for questions. There's one mic here, and then I can do the running, Alika. I can run around, and oh yeah, we got it. Oh, we've got lovely staff here. Okay. Here we go. Oh, and there's another mic right there.
I'll sit by Blake.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Doug Boyd,
Check.
Humpback Whale Sanctuary. The plugging, restoring corals back into the water. With our global warming, there's certain corals that are more resilient to the higher temperatures. Are we focusing on the long-range global warming issue?
Yeah, absolutely. Coral resilience and resistance to coral bleaching events is definitely something that we're looking into. That's just one of the options in the toolkit that may be useful if the community thinks it's necessary. We're also partners in the Restore with Resilience initiative with the Coral Resilience Lab HIMB that are looking at specific areas where coral bleaching has occurred and trying to identify thermally resilient coral colonies that have persisted and trying to propagate more of them. And right now they're more focused on Olowalu, but we want to be able to offer this potential to other communities if they think it is necessary in their backyards as well.
Has any thought been given when you're looking at different sites? Are the underground flows of water mapped at those sites and how they influence the patterns of the coral? And also, is there any monitoring plan for how much sediment is, reaching the site each month or each year?
I believe there is some work underway. MNMRC has a really extensive monitoring program, and we selected these sites with their collaboration and support. And because they are more familiar, they might be able to speak more to the specifics of these individual sites. Jill, do you have anything to add worth mentioning?
Okay. Aloha, everyone. My name is Jill. I work with Maui Nui Marine Resource Council, and thank you all again for being here tonight and for your questions. We do have Hui o Kawaiola coastal water quality monitoring program, and some of those areas are lower nutrients further south and less sediment runoff. We don't have an exact amount of sediment runoff or know exactly what the groundwater flow is down there. So if there is more information available about that, we would love to learn more. We mainly picked those sites as potential sites just because of the health of the reef and less sediment compared to North Kihei. In terms of monitoring for long term, we would hope to train people to monitor themselves with cameras if they go out, or monthly. The schedule is yet to be set, but in the works.
Yeah, and then one other thing about freshwater, like I think I mentioned up there, is freshwater has been the most consistent thing, and communities across the state, every community that we go to. So that's a huge one. And one area we get a lot of information is from fishermen. So like West Oʻahu, we got a lot of information from both fishermen and limu practitioners is telling us about, where the limu used to be and how the freshwater used to flow. So that's beyond our capability for our organization. But again, like when we look for partners and partnerships, it's a lot of different groups, right? And that's one of them that we listen to. Wamanalo Limuhui has been another great resource for limu and freshwater. A little less, I think, traditional scientific, but I mean, huge knowledge base that is just starting to be tapped now.
Can you inform us of the 2 permits that you already have pending? And is this in correlation to any sanctions from the Navy to create any kind of remedial actions to corals? Third one is, how do you get permission to do coral restoration in different parts of the areas?
Not too. Which 2 permits were you referring to? About the Navy?
So does coral, Kuleana coral restoration have any permits pending with the state at this time to do any kind of, to further your research, either in Maui or in Maluaka and Oneuli to be in particular?
Specific to Maui, no, we don't have any requests in right now. The goal was to come and do what we're doing today and what we've been meeting with people over the last few months, but is to see, before we even ask for permits, is this something that the community wants? So yeah, we haven't even applied for permits yet. That's kind of our last step. The permits that we work under now are specific to our sites on Oʻahu. And then we also work under like federal permits, which is like federal entities, but they're also specific to other sites, nothing in Maui.
Hi, I was curious about the modules that you guys demonstrated, and I was just wondering if there had been any modules that were somehow suspended in the water floating, maybe to overcome sedimentation issues and at least reduce some of the wave action?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so modules for us is like a pretty broad category of just something that is man-made. And the floating ones, like if you've seen a lot of the media or pictures of other parts of the world, they have floating cages, right? And they have trees. Because of Hawaii's wave energy, at least where we work, it is not real practical. Like, every winter, like West Oʻahu, we see those 20 and 30-foot swells. So it's not as practical here. It could be. I think there's a possibility for it, but the state and federal, those permitting guidelines are way harder because now you get into kind of like moorings, which is another huge issue, right? Is you start to create liability for one, if like someone's boat engine got sucked into one or they came loose and damaged something. So we have not, just because after talking about it and trying multiple things, that doesn't seem like it would work for us. And then with modules, I mean, I'll kind of touch on that. We showed what we call the fish habitat modules. It's this small kind of, the one with the pukas inside, and then we have the pyramid one. So we have a bunch of different kinds. So we have these, they're not actually this size, they're 50 pounds and about this big. But these are kind of just stackable. I forget the name of it. You can ask Danny or Blake after, but just a stack. But we kind of working with some of the fish pond guys in Waimanalo and seeing like the traditional methods that they use for, what do they call it? Haleia, like the fish houses. is basically, or imukai is another name for it, is a stack of rocks that they use. And that's kind of been our, like one thing we saw that's actually still being done. That's like a traditional practice, and how can we, because they asked that too, like how come coral's not growing on it? How do we accelerate coral growth? But they're using it at the mindset, which I think is really cool, is like a traditional practice that's still alive. And I think some of us in this work, like we think coastal protection and artificial reef is this new thing. They've been doing it for a long time. And they've been using it to both create fish habitat artificially, and protect critical infrastructure, which was their fish ponds, right, the food source. So really cool, I think, to replicate or try to have new versions of that traditional practice. A couple other different modifications of modules that we have. But yeah, those are one of them. You talked about getting off the seafloor. Sediment's a huge issue. Is reef stars. If you heard, so that we haven't been permitted for. We're applying for permits now, which is essentially a like rebar structure that's coated in sand. So it's like just looks like sand, and then you put live coral on there. And what that does is gets the corals kind of above the sediment, but also can stabilize loose substrate. So like if you see big anchor damage or like ship grounding sites where they just rip the reef up, that can kind of help solidify the loose material so it's not banging around and killing everything else. So yeah, we're doing all kind of stuff.
I'm interested in coral reproduction. Do you find that microfragmenting and transplantation has any impact on spawning? Or do these, because we have many corals here in Maui where the coral is alive, but it no longer reproduces for reasons we don't necessarily understand.
Absolutely, that's something that we're certainly interested in, and one of the hypothesized benefits of using these large rescued coral colonies is that, in theory at least, they are sexually mature, can contribute to the surrounding ecosystems and facilitate recruitment. That's something that we're taking a closer look at and applying for permits to be able to take a biopsy and look at the presence of gametes inside their tissues, and establishing a timeline for what is kind of the general time frame after the corals have become dislodged and reattached. Is there a certain time frame, whether it's 6 months, 1 year later, where they have to recover to a certain degree to be able to participate in that process again? We're also trying our best to be able to physically observe it for certain species like Passalipora meandrina and grandis that actually do spawn in the very early morning. So that time frame is known, but it does depend on the water depth you're working at. So something we're very interested in learning more about.
In your observations of different areas on Maui, there are two I'm wondering if you've gone and viewed at all. And that would be Molokini and then the motherhead coral at Oluwalu, if you've seen what conditions they're in.
We have not firsthand had the opportunity to check out those sites. It's definitely good to keep in mind as we start to move forward and consider other restoration areas, but at this point, no, we've not had the opportunity to check them out.
I was wondering about Kuleana Coast program. And that's specifically to Oahu, or is that on Maui potentially as well?
At this time, it is only on Oahu. However, the goal is to be able to open this up to other communities and other islands as we grow.
Okay, and how would you apply for that or get in touch with that program?
Yeah, absolutely. So the program runs in the summer, so we'll be recruiting in the spring. We'll be sure to post details to all of our social media as well as our online newsletter, which you can find online. There's also a web page that has all the directions to apply, so stay tuned, and we look forward to the possibility of working with you.
Thank you.
This is a question for your last slide, kind of about your guys' future endeavors. You had a few different pins on Maui. Are those prospective sites that you guys were thinking about, or is that just representative of like you're hoping to do more work here on Maui?
Yeah, they're completely just on the map. Just yeah, they don't mean anything.
Right.
It's just kind of like we're basically trying to get a widespread. So if we know that this works, and creating the network is supposed to be what that's showing. Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks.
Okay, thank you guys so much. I don't mean to cut everybody off. Yes, please, give them a hand. That was a lot. We just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and I'm just gonna kind of wrap us up. Of course, we have a little bit of time, and our presenters will be down here. We want to once again mahalo to County of Maui for making tonight possible. If you would like to be informed of future events, please feel free to sign up for our e-newsletter. There are little flyers where you checked in. It has this QR code on it, or you can just go to mauireefs.org to make sure you are updated on all of our events and talks. If you would like to give to support our work as well, we appreciate every gift. That is also on the flyer. And these are our social channels that you can follow us on. We're on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram for just, smaller updates, things of that nature. And we just want to say mahalo to our sponsors and, of course, to our supporters like you. We're so thrilled to have this many people in person in one place. It's really, really exciting to see. So mahalo to all of you, to all of these people that help make what we do possible. And we just want to say aloha ahuiho. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please drive safely, and we will see you all next time. Thank you so much.